Hi everybody, my name is Dagney, and this is my video talking about my research project for American History 2. And before I start, I'm going to go ahead and apologize for my absolutely atrocious camera quality. My computer just sucks, apparently. So, to start out with, I did my project on Miss Daisy McGuire of Norton, North Carolina. And to give her a little background, she was the first ever female dentist in North Carolina and the first woman in North Carolina to ever go to dental school. So I chose my project on her specifically because I want to go to medical school. I want to be a doctor, surgeon, we'll see probably. And so I guess I just feel connected to her in some way of her medical background and her perseverance in choosing to go to dental school, even when there was a lot of obstacles surrounding her. And so I hope to do the same in my lifetime. And then also, her being a woman and taking those first strides and sort of, advocating for herself and her career and still doing what she loved, despite so many people telling her she couldn't. And me being the feminist that I am, I absolutely love that. So for my project, I did a creative writing essay. So I wanted to sort of, I guess, get into her mindset of what it was like to go through these experiences and go through her life. And she lived to be 100 years old, so there was a lot to write about, of course. And so I wrote from her perspective on just sort of how she started to begin everything and then where that ended up later in her life. So my essay begins, I'll read you the first paragraph because I think it's, I don't know, I guess it shows what the rest of it is kind of going to sound like. And she was a country girl. She was from Jackson County, North Carolina. So I read it with like a little bit of an accent. It's just how I was imagining it while I was writing it. So it starts out off with, "I know what I'm doing, Daddy," I exclaimed with impatience as he took the forceps from my small hand. "I know you know how, Daisy, but most folks ain't used to a child pulling teeth, let alone a little girl," he murmured as he turned back and faced his patient. Mr. Clark gave a smirk, the best he could find his mouth gag. "Now, Dr. McGuire, if the girl wants to practice, I'm more than happy to let her take this lame tooth I got here. Ain't got much use for it anyway." My father hesitantly obliged, and at 6 years old, I had pulled my first tooth, unrooting my love for dentistry as I ripped it from its soft, slimy gum. So that being the first paragraph, that was just her first, and this has actually happened too. She pulled her first tooth at 6 years old, working in her father's office. So I wanted to include that just to show like boom, she was already so passionate about it just from a little girl from watching her dad work. And then as my essay continues, I go into I guess her life and where she lived and where she grew up, and I used a lot of pictures, primary sources, of course, from her lifetime that were donated to a lot of museums around here by her family and just the people that surrounded her from her practice, being here for so long. Of her childhood home, her working in her office, her picture from when she graduated dental school in Atlanta, and just kind of use those to describe, I guess, what she was seeing, what she was experiencing. So the first paragraph, after the thesis, goes into what her childhood house looked like. So it was this big 2-story white house that had oak trees on the side of it, and like steps that went up to it, and they were in brick. And so I sort of wrote about what she would see and what she would feel during that time of like walking up the steps and looking at the oak trees and watching them sway in the southern wind. And then going from that, her father died a few years later in, I think it was 1898, and then she went to an apprenticeship. I think it was in Anderson, South Carolina, if I'm remembering correctly. So if I didn't just write my whole essay, but she went to that apprenticeship in Anderson, North Carolina. She already knew how to do everything at that point, basically, because she had been watching her father for so long. And so after the apprenticeship, just 2 years later, she already had her own practice, and that's when she got a letter from the North Carolina Board of Dental Examiners saying that, hey, you can't do this without a license, because it was like, I think the National Board of Dental Examiners was just made in 1905, so it was like a pretty new thing. And before that, of course, no woman, especially in North Carolina, had ever gone to school before to do that. And so they said, hey, you can't, continue to practice and own your own practice and office without a license. So even though she described being kind of scared and nervous to go to dental school because she knew she was probably going to be the only female there, she went and she graduated with honors a few years later, and she was the top in her class. She writes about in her own autobiography and all these different things, saying that she was like so many miles ahead of all of her classmates, especially they were all men too, so they were all asking her to come and help, and I think that's really awesome. And she earned the nickname Doll Baby in the process. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I think it could be interpreted multiple different ways. Maybe her, you know, intense ability to be able to recognize detail in doing her work. And so after she graduated from dental school, and she had already met her husband Wayne at this point, and they got married in 1902. And so they were, sort of living together and still together during this time while she was in dental school. And then she got a letter from, I guess, the people in Silva saying that, hey, like, we really need your help up here. This is a really, sort of, how mountain communities are, of course, living here, sort of isolated and hard to leave to get the proper medical care that you need, whether that be for the rest of your body or your teeth. And so they asked her to come and move her practice to Silva, and that's where she went, her and Wayne, her husband, did. And so starting her practice up there, sort of getting acquainted with everything around, and her being from Jackson County already, like, she was, I guess, or would I assume she was okay with moving to this small town, and it was sort of nostalgic for her in that way. And she wasn't planning on staying either. She was just planning on meeting the original needs of the people who had asked her to come. But she was completely overwhelmed by how many people needed dental care at that point. And so she asked her husband Wayne, because he was a carpenter, say, hey, can you go to dental school so you can help me? And so he said, yeah, okay, I'll go. Like it was, some easy thing, especially, I guess it was back then, but nowadays that'd be a lot of money. But he went to dental school, and then they continued to work together, like, for the rest of their lives. I think she retired when she was 97, so she did a lot of dentistry work, along with Wayne. And so they would work in the same office, separated by, like, a single brown dresser that Wayne had made. And, like, they would have their different patients and everything, but they would just work every day together, and it was totally awesome, apparently. And they ended up having 3 little girls, and all 3 of them became dentists. And then all 3 of them married dentists, except for one married a dental lab technician. And still, their family members and their grandchildren are dentists also, and they're still practicing today in Silva and in Asheville and all the surrounding areas. So they definitely kept, I guess, the name of dentistry in the family. So I think that's really awesome too, to inspire your children to continue, I guess, being so passionate about what you love, to inspire your children to continue your legacy. And they all went to Southern Dental College in Atlanta, just as Daisy and her husband did. So it's really awesome. And a lot of her legacy still lives around here. When we took a field trip to the Mountain Heritage Museum the other day, the lady was talking. She said that she just had a bunch of dental supplies donated. And I was like, oh my gosh, is it from the McGuire family? And she was like, yeah. And so, like, they're still super big around here, still own all these old dental artifacts and tools and everything that they had used during that time period. Quite medieval, so hopefully many of them aren't used today. But it's still cool to see all the old things they have, and they're still so preserved because of how well this family has kept their career intact. So that's basically my project. Thank you for watching, Miss Muse. I know you're watching because you have to. Um, and I am very grateful to be able to share something that I'm passionate about, especially something so, I guess, close to me in my medical sense and in my feminist sense and in every other sense too, especially my hometown. So I appreciate it. Hope you guys had a great semester. Bye bye.